Okay, the title of the panel today is Culture, Policy and Dynamics in South Asia. We've got with us Mr. Sumant, Batra, Dr. Salima, Hashmi, Dr. Fouzia, Saeed and myself as moderator. So first of all, I'll request Mr. Sumant Batra from India. He is the curator and culture innovator. Lawyer by profession, he has been into promoting Indian heritage, culture, art and literature, and he has recently initiated a Dalit Literature Festival along with his older engagements with Umang Literary Festival and Taj Colloquium. I request Sumant Batra to start his musings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sab. First of all, I thank the organizers of Islamabad Literature Festival for inviting us from India, my colleagues, Piyush who's sitting here, Saif, and Mr. Kulkarni. And it has been such an amazing experience, not just the festival, but all the hospitality and the warmth that we have experienced around it. And in fact, that is essentially the reason why we are sitting here, because that's the culture of this region. The culture where the hospitality, the warmth is embedded so deeply into our DNA systems that, you know, whatever may be the differences, the disagreements, but our courtesies, our warmth in terms of how we must conduct with one another stays completely unfettered and unmoved by the surrounding circumstances. Well, I will speak for India in terms of, you know, the session as per se is a very broad session, so I'll try to sort of look at it from the prism that I look at it from. I mean, I feel that we do not actually have any cultural policy in India. If whatever little exists is very flawed. And I say it from the perspective that we as a nation never really integrated the cultural policy into the overall national vision post 1940s. We never really made it as an important and vibrant part of the thought architecture of the country. While it started on the right track post-independence, when for the first 15, 16 years, in some way, even though it may not have been a structured way, the vision that was being formulated for the nation, the culture was considered to be a very integral part, almost something which sat at the heart of the whole policy making or the vision making for the country. A number of institutions were created or were built or restored. A lot of investment in terms of time, resource, energy was set aside for cultural initiatives. But I think we lost the plot sometime in the early 1970s, I would say, or late 60s, when because of political instability, the attention or the focus moved to very different issues. And we were never really able to get the attention back. And when the payment crisis happened in the early 90s, when the default happened to IMF, the focus of the country in terms of the entire vision moved to economic development from the perspective of, let's say, capitalist approach. And we were never really able to come out of that trap. The entire aspiration of the nation started to be built around a 2-digit GDP figure. That became almost an obsession for the nation, and particularly in the last 15 years or so, when the entire goal was how to reach the 2-digit mark on the GDP side. While there's nothing wrong in having that aspiration, we do need to have economic development to be able to serve a lot of other objectives, including on the cultural side. But when that becomes a factor which sort of narrows down to a very smaller midterm, not even midterm, short-term goal of developing markets rather than looking at a larger horizon, that is where my problem is, because I feel that over the last 10 years our focus has been to build India as a market where the global investors should come and invest in. Now we don't realize that markets are a phenomena where people come and invest as long as the markets are attractive. As soon as the markets will fluctuate or they will have a tremor, they would exit. They will never invest in the society, they will never invest in the nation beyond the market. And that is why if you have a vision where you have an equal corresponding focus on the cultural development of the nation as alongside the economic development, you will make sure that people are investing in the nation, in the society, in the communities, in the culture of that nation, and not just in the market, with a very limited short-term benefit goal. And this is an observation which I was not born with. I mean, I experienced it as a part of my work in over 25 countries, as a part of World Bank consultant, IMF consultant, working on the policy side. And I realized when I observed these systems from very close, very closely, that the amount of investment that is made on the cultural side is unbelievable in these countries. And the reason for that is that they realize the importance of building the soft side of the nation. A small country very well knows that it can never have a huge military or economic power to be able to create a space for themselves. But even a small country, if it has a powerful cinema industry, it can influence the whole world through its art and cinema. That is the power of art and culture, because it influences the minds of the people. It creates very deep impressions on the hearts and the minds of the people, which is much more powerful than military and economic power. And when I realized it, I basically sort of decided that it is perhaps unfair to expect the governments to be doing everything for you. Governments have their own compulsions. They have to deal with knee-jerk issues in hand, and we in the region have far more pressing issues than for them to be really considering these issues as a priority. And therefore I thought I should go back, and probably we should mobilize support from the within the community, from people who are thought leaders, intellectuals, to come together and start a number of initiatives towards building the architecture for creative aspirations for the country. We are nobody to build the vision for the country in that sense as a part of the policy architecture, but at least from the creative aspirations of a society, we thought we could do a lot of things. And that is what we have been doing over the last 4 to 5 years in terms of trying to build a series of initiatives across the country, be it in the form of literary festivals or museums, and not just museums, but creating platforms for museum culture development policy, where you increase footfalls in the museums, where you help people who have collections to institutionalize those collections and make it available for the larger accessibility and footfall for people to benefit from them. Looking at a number of other initiatives, for example, libraries. We have a huge program where we are working on the libraries. And the amazing part is that it has almost become a movement. All these cultural initiatives have amazing support from the society and from the corporate world also, which has been coming forward in a very overwhelming way to support these initiatives, and the results are beginning to show. One of the most encouraging part is that the government, though the government may not really itself be spending, and large part of it is also because we are such a diverse country that it becomes very complex for the country to have a kind of a cultural policy which is very explicit. So they allow the dynamics to, for themselves deal with this issue, which also is, I think, to some extent fair and understandable. But I do wish that they would realize the importance of investing more. So if you look at two important developments that have happened around the world, Canada announced early this year that over the next 5 years they will double their budget and spending on the cultural side, which is a huge step. And I think that's something which should be replicated. It should inspire countries in the region to also do something like that, rather than doubling, tripling the budget on the defense and other issues. And the second is the EU. If you see, European Union also decided that because of the negativity that was being created by the measure that were being taken or had to be taken to deal with the terrorism issues, the counter-terrorism measures that create stress on the society, they have decided that the amount they spend on dealing with these measures, an equivalent amount they will spend on the cultural side, so that the energy of the people can be channelized in the right direction, and the negativity that can be created by these tough security measures can be offset by measures that are taken on the corresponding side, on the cultural side. So these are my opening comments, and as we go forward, probably I'll sort of dwell on some of the other issues.
Thank you, Mr. Batra. We now come to know about whatever is happening by way of culture across the border. Now you will listen to whatever is happening here. We have with us Dr. Salima Hashmi. Professor Salima Hashmi has a personality, let's say, three into one. First, a leading artist, curator, contemporary art historian, and educationist. She has been the principal of the National College of Arts and then Dean of the School of Visual Art and Design at Beacon House University. Secondly, she has been writing books which are path-breaking in their own way. Unveiling the Visible, that is about the lives and works of women artists of Pakistan. And Memories, Myths and Mutations, Contemporary Art of India and Pakistan, jointly with the author Yashodhara Dalmia. And now the Eye Still Seeks, Contemporary Art of Pakistan. Thirdly, and that's about her exhibitions, Hanging Fire, an exhibition in New York, and The Night, or rather This Night Bitten Dawn, Lagta Hai Daag Daag Ujala, at the Delhi Art Fair in 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Salima Hashmi.
Thank you, Waseem. Well, it's no state secret, I think, that the question of culture and cultural policies has been a contested one in Pakistan since 1947. Because culture, unlike the arts, is not actually formed by a few individuals, but it's the lived experience of communities. And it has both historical and territorial, outlines. And its extraterritorial components, actually, they create the tensions and the layers, which can alter depending on how you want to define culture. And Pakistan's political and social history in particular has experienced these very seismic shifts, because every few years, the frame through which we view Pakistani culture is altered. And the deeply felt experiences of communities, they're put aside, and an external layer is introduced. And then we as a nation are invited to reframe our histories our memories, our contexts, and our beliefs. And components as mundane as dress, or how we greet one another, or the way of social interaction, or art making, or even festivals and rituals are reinvented and they're recast, and the prism is turned over on its side. And what we have believed in as communities, or what we've been comfortable in as communities, is put aside in uncatalogued heaps. And a language, and I use language in a very wide manner, is reinvented to represent us. And a new layer is put on, our lived experience. The intellectual and cultural capital of very diverse communities which comprise Pakistan are suppressed, and a new rootless construct is put in place. A nation with a history of militarization and centralized authority sometimes denies lived experience, and so it presents a problem. And yet it's interesting that these very dictatorial regimes that we have experienced, they also feel the necessity of understanding culture, of somehow containing it, defining it, and then altering it. Because there is the pursuit, we have found that the pursuit of national identity is an important one. In 1968, there was a standing committee of culture which was set up during General Ayub Khan's regime, and which comprised certain eminent intellectuals, writers, poets. And they visited, at that time, both wings of the country, did wide consultations, and a report was prepared, which came to be known as the Faiz report, because Faiz Ahmad Faiz did the actual writing. But it never saw the light of day, because by that time, the regime had changed. In 1975, this report again surfaced, and it was now called Problems of National Art and Culture. And it traced the threads and components of Pakistani culture. It's interesting that when you look at this report, you recognize that actually it was very progressive in the way that it looked at both history and territories that comprise Pakistan, and very realistically looked at the components that comprise people's experience. It also saw absolutely no antagonism between what we call high culture, classical culture, and what we call folk culture, or culture of the people. The point that this report made, and I think still is valid, that the state receives more from this cultural lived experience of its people than it can ever pay back in terms of patronage. I think that this is something that we forget, because we feel that unless the state supports culture, there is something missing, forgetting that actually the state is made up of cultural experience, and it is enriched through cultural experience. Since this has never been a priority, with successive regimes and governments that we've had, consequently the issue of national identity, such as it may, remains a contested one. In recent years, we've seen other phenomena which have happened, because Takht Lahore or Takht Islamabad, whatever it is, they have been constrained to construct cultural policies or cultural identities, and which may or may not bear more than a passing resemblance to the lived experience of the majority of the communities in Pakistan. We find that there are two layers to these policies or templates which defy or subvert or distort the lived experiences of people which comprise our nation. Number one is a frame that is an imported frame. And it comes from the Middle East, comes from a totally different context, with different compulsions, different rituals, different cuisine, different art, different apparel, different music, and all the different myriads of minutiae that make up culture, which is lived experience. And that frame is imposed, not being embedded in lived experience. You find that this is a very superficial frame. The other is, because of a particular political history of militarization, this is another frame which is indigenous, but as a super layer, it is at odds with people's aspirations and people's lived experience. So that if one is to put it into a sort of couple of sentences, I'll quote from Fez's speech that he made when he accepted the Lenin Peace Prize in '62, and which he's talking about freedom and peace, because at odds with this frame of militarization is the frame of peace. I don't think one is making a great leap of imagination if one realizes that for culture to flourish, it requires a basic underpinnings of peace. And if you don't have that, you obviously have interrupted cultural practices. Fez wrote or spoke, अमन और आज़ादी बहुत हसीन और ताबनाक चीज़ है, और सभी तसव्वुर कर सकते हैं कि अमन गंदम के खेत हैं और सफ़ेदे के दरख्त, दुल्हन का आंचल है और बच्चों के हंसते हुए हाथ, शायर का कलम है और मुसव्विर का मुए कलम, और आज़ादी इन सब सिफ़ात की ज़ामिन और ग़ुलामी इन सब खूबियों की कातिल है जो इंसान और हैवान में तमीज़ करती हैं. If one looks at peace as the aspiration, which is the overarching aspiration, if there are any cultures which are to flourish, then we need to perhaps recast the way that we, A, make cultural policies, and B, think about how these are to be propagated. I won't say anything further about that because I think that will come out in the discussions maybe or in questions. But I do believe that as we look, as we fly over the region, which is Pakistan, and we look at certain things that have become part of, almost become part of the geography. For example, the line created by lights, searchlights, which define one of the borders with one of our neighbors. And we'll wonder as to how this is a good way to, in fact, look at or read our region. One looks forward to a time when the light will be a different kind, when it will shine on actually the region in a way that will make it possible for sharing of certain cultures and for exchanging of certain cultures, so there is a simultaneous flourishing on every side of our region, north, west, east, and south. I think I'll end there, and we can take it on from there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I invite Dr. Fouzia Saeed. She is, as you know, is the Executive Director of Lok Virsa. She is a social activist and folk culture promoter. She made her name particularly with the book Taboo, that was about the hidden culture of a red light area. But she equally made her name with the second work, Working with Sharks, That means, following upon that book, one comes to know that she has been a great lobbyist for legislation in favor of women. Here, Dr. Fouzia Saeed in front of you.
Thank you very much. It's difficult to say anything after Salima Hashmi's talk and my senior colleagues. But I will try and focus on something pragmatic and something recent, which I was engaged in, with the intention to inform our audience what we have been experimenting in terms of a national cultural policy. So just to give a very brief background, like Salima also mentioned, that Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who was the founder of this institution also, where we are sitting right now, Lok Virsa, and about 20 some other cultural institutions in the country. He was the first one to craft or develop a cultural policy, which was never culminated in the form of political / legal procedures, but it gave a vision to the country, and then the field of culture was kind of evolved around that. When the ministry was formed and directorates were formed, etc. So basically that was the vision for culture in Pakistan. And after that, so in 1973, that was kind of the guiding light. Then after that, there was a long period when there was no formalized initiative or effort to develop a cultural policy. Then in 1995, under Fakhruzaman, there was a committee, and it worked extensively, and they developed a policy which was quite elaborate, and it articulated the history of the country, the cultural history of the country, and it articulated several other aspects in terms of impact of Islam, in terms of impact of colonization, etc. Now that policy also, I think, was shared with many people in different provinces, but it never culminated in terms of getting it passed through the cabinet. So it was not instituted as such, but it was there, a document was there. And after about 10 years, they did a revision of that policy, and they went around and they did a 5-page note saying, okay, that policy sort of gives us a guiding framework, but this is where it gets revised. Again, this was not official. So as such, I can say that to date, there is no cultural policy in Pakistan because there hasn't been any officially. Then in 2009, there was it was more like a commission, not a task force, a commission on national heritage. And they did the work, and they kind of put together as to where we need to go. It was not philosophical, it was more like projectized kind of, what kind of projects do we want to envisage in future. Then in 2010, the devolution happened, the 18th Amendment in the Constitution, which gave the provinces their right to legislate and their right to actually implement several strands of administration, and culture was one of them. So in simple statement, I would say culture was devolved in Pakistan in 2010. Now I'm speaking in terms of administrative meaning. Culture is with people and it doesn't get centralized or devolved, but in terms of administration of this sector. So culture was devolved, and the provinces then had the right to legislate on it, to administer it. This included archaeology also and contemporary culture. There were a few institutions that were left with the federal government. Lok Virsa was one of them, where you are sitting, and Pakistan National Council of the Arts was another. The Film Censor Board was another. I think some archaeological institutions, development of Urdu language, those kinds of institutions were left with the center. Some of these institutions had a national mandate. Like Lok Virsa has a national mandate. It is under the federal government, but it is not for the federal area. It is for the whole country. So I'm just giving you this very brief administrative kind of scenario. So recently there was an initiative of developing, again, yet another initiative of developing a national policy, because the Prime Minister was also interested and many of us were interested in doing that. The big question was, if if culture is a field that has been devolved, why then do a national policy? That was a big question. And the response was that when we are dealing with the rest of the world as one country, then we need to have some vision in terms of how our culture would be seen, how we participate in any international initiatives or signing of conventions, figuring out how our foreign missions are going to take the image of the country forward. And also because each province, it was quite surprising for me, but I did hear voices from the provinces saying it is good that it has been devolved. That is what the provinces wanted. But there has to be some kind of a cohesive vision where Balochistan can communicate with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Punjab, and so it was a bit split for them. So there were good points and the downside both. However, we embarked on a process and we thought we'll figure it out as we go along as to what people want. So the solution that we came up with was to keep it very to the level of abstraction, but stance setting, value setting, stance setting, rather than giving specifics. Because we figured that provinces can do the specifics. However, at a national level, we can determine our priorities and our stance. Because culture is an area which is, I would say, quite full of controversies too. Some people say our culture really, the roots of our culture start in 1947. Some people say with the entry of Islam in the subcontinent. Some people say we are thousands of years old. So even that perspective, the perspective on the roots of our culture is a bit murky. So it would help a lot if as a nation we can set our stance. And that would guide our curriculum, that would guide wherever we are going in future. So we need to figure out what we think about our culture, how old we people are. So I think that was received very well by the provinces, that aspect, that we will not get into the details, but we will pretty much articulate a vision. So I will tell you a few important things that all the provinces agreed upon. We had about 7-8 consultations, 2 in Gilgit and Baltistan, so 1 in Baltistan, 1 in Gilgit, 2 in Punjab, north and south. We had 2 in Balochistan, in Gwadar and in Quetta. We had 1 in Sindh, and we had 1 in Islamabad. We have 1 in Muzaffarabad. So these are the findings that we are putting together. And it was very important for almost all the people that we talked to that Pakistan was a multicultural, multilinguist and multi-ethnic country, which was thousands of years, which is thousands of years old. The culture is thousands of years old. And a mention of Mehergarh and Bolan Valley and Gandhara and Indus Valley. Everybody stressed that that should be a part of it, so that it is very clear that we are multi-layered culture and we own all the layers, all the religions with a pride. So that became kind of sum total consensus of this exercise. Now nationwide, I do not know. We will put it to a test, and I'm sure that the kinds of schools of thoughts we have, there will be some controversy. However, it seemed very clear that people who were associated with culture, and mind you, we had people in these consultations, and we had several layers of consultations, not just these. People from contemporary arts and traditional arts and music, performing arts, including theatre. We had people from architecture, tourism, archaeology. So, all the fields of culture, literature, languages, and the consensus that developed was that. Secondly, a very upfront acknowledgement that we are a federation of several independent cultural entities, and through that we want to assimilate or emerge a national identity. But there was no romance of oneness, one this and one that, one language and one culture and one. It was very clear, pluralism, diversity, and thousands of years old culture. These were like key words that I think we pretty much had a consensus on. Then we had another aspect, democracy was debated. whether our culture is democratic or not, but there was a consensus that democracy has been chosen as the future path for our society by the people. And therefore, we want to transform our culture which can rejuvenate or nurture democratic values. So it was clear as people debated that our culture may not support democratic values in several areas, but there was a consensus in future direction. So nobody said that yes, our culture is very democratic, but they said that we want to move towards that, and therefore the culture, the curriculum, these kinds of modes of transmission like media, film, curriculum, these are the modes of transmission of culture, and they should follow that direction, that we want to inculcate democratic values and we want to inculcate pluralistic values in our culture. So that to me was very encouraging. And then in terms of specifics, we charted out about 10, 12 areas which had performing arts and theatre, music, including within the performing arts and visual arts, and how to transfer culture to a younger generation. There was also consensus on the fact that we have to give priority to developing cultural identity of our youth. And I think there were elaborated debates on how we have left that gap, which got filled with something else, which we were not expecting. And so people became distanced from our cultural identity and distanced from the pride that we are supposed to feel. So I think that, and the challenges, I will just identify a few. In terms of challenges, people said that one was the tabooing of the local indigenous cultures, the romance of English and Urdu, and putting down of the regional languages and putting down of regional cultures, social stratification. Second was that many of the rules we have inherited from the colonial era are still there, getting NOCs for this and that, as if, you know, the state is very nervous about anything that happens by itself, people performing or live performances which are not controlled. So those kinds of things came as challenges. I'm not going into the details, but just kind of touching those things, that those things need to be reformed. Maybe tax structures need to be reformed. Maybe there have to be more academies of high level quality in film and theatre, things like that. But overall, I was very pleased with the exercise because the participation from the provinces was very enthusiastic, and it meant so much to them. In terms of where it is right now, it is in the draft stage. And I think once the government is out of the roller coaster, it will be considered again, and we will probably take it to some level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salima. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mohammad Waseem. I teach in LUMS. My topic today is cultural dynamics of Pakistan. And first of all, I try to deal with the culture question. The culture question, by that I mean there are two uses of the word culture. One is like way of life, Indian culture, Pakistani culture, and the other one is, of course, the artistic expression. For example, you go for a cultural evening, dance, singing, music, and whatever. In Pakistan, there have been two heritages. One, the classical heritage, which is Indo-Iranian heritage. Amir Khosrow, for example, down to Ghalib and others. And then the local heritage, and we've got the poets and artists from our various provinces. Classical art versus folk art. That is not moving? Okay. How? It's not moving? Okay, I must move on. There have been various debates about culture. If you remember the great Progressive Writers Association early in 20th century, that led to the division between the followers of those who would say art for art's sake, and the others, of course, they were talking about art for life. By the time we move forward in Pakistan, there was in the mid-career of the country Ziaul Haq, and from there starts the cultural policing. And there I would say that we will have the chance to talk about a little. And I had given a list of art establishments, which I think there's no time at the moment. I must move on. There are on overall two perspectives on culture. One, culture as an independent variable. This one, thank you. Here, I talk, for example, about culture as ideology, vision, mission, agenda, identity, and commitment, whereby I mean that all the time there are ideologues, they try to impinge on you their concept of what Pakistani culture should be. There is a kind of a mission thereby, and in this mission, there is or are supracultural influences which guide and shape that particular ideological agenda of culture. For example, religion is one. All the time there is the religious lobby which is very, very strong about what kind of culture Pakistanis should have. Other, for example, nationalism, our culture should be different from the Indian culture, for example, or whatever. So these two guiding principles have been operationalized for those who believe that culture can be tapped and culture can be shaped according to the will of the people who want to shape. Second is culture as a dependent variable. For example, art, language, literature, geography, history, region, class, meaning thereby culture of the land and culture of the people, the way it is, it must have an expression, and that particular ideological commitment should not be very much into it. So I don't think that I'm able to manage it, but I'll try. The national project. Why was this culture, which has come down to us the way it has, was influenced so much and manipulated so much? There were some projects. One was the national project, the other was the Islamic project. First of all, the national project. Here, what we have been trying to do is partitioning of culture. What we have been saying is, look, Pakistan has got out of India, but India has not got out of Pakistan, because for the last 2,000 years there has been Indian culture that is part and parcel of our style of life, and therefore there should be hardening of boundaries, not only the geographical boundary, more than that. And you must have seen about whatever we talk about Basant and various other wedding ceremonies and so on. The language policy, again, it was too centralized, too domineering, when Urdu was in a way imposed on certain linguistic expressions of various ethnic communities. And culture policy, again, we've been talking mostly about national culture very much at the expense of the constituent cultures of Pakistan belonging to various ethno-linguistic cultures. Education policy, for example, from Sindh, you hear voices that most of the history which is taught to our students, there are no heroes from Sindh. Similarly, from Bengal and from Balochistan and from other areas, and it has been centered around the Muslim minority provinces of India, as they were called. High culture, low culture, the ruling community on top, in a way, talks about Taj Mahal, about Ghalib, about various other symbols of Indo-Iranian culture, but low culture, the peasant culture, the culture of the people, that's very much ignored. Collective memory of Muslim India, poetry, history, novels, coming down to Naseem Hajazi, for example, and starting from Musaddas Hali and onwards. In this national project, there was a kind of a dividing line. For example, on this side of River Indus, people tended to, in a way, have a kind of a progression of Indian culture, Sindhi language, Punjabi language, very much close to Sanskrit in so many ways. On the other hand, the trans-Indus provinces of Balochistan and KP, they have their orientation towards Central Asia, and there is that way a problem of national integration. Well, in this process, we discovered the Indus civilization. because every nation tries to get the museum value. We are very old, and if you remember, in that way, our first book officially sponsored was by Mortimer Wheeler, 5,000 Years of History, where Pakistan was only 3 or 4 years old at that time, 1950-51. So we have been looking for antiquity, and we have been looking for the map. We are trying to see where our culture lies, and there we have discovered Indus civilization against the Gangetic civilization, and Sindh versus Hind, and Rimland versus Heartland, and in this way there has been an exercise of separating ourselves from India in cultural terms. This is the exercise that we have been very much into. The other project, Islamic project for culture, again, what has been happening is that there has been urbanization, de-peasantization. From culture of shrine, people have been moving to the cities to culture of madrasa, and from syncretism, Sufism, we come to scriptural tradition, very much to the text, and that has been happening, and that is one way of the way text has overruled the context. Otherization is the result. Sunnis have others in the form of Shias, Shias others in the form of Sunnis, Hindus, Christians, others. We have created so many others, the cultural others, and that has also led to vigilante culture, which means, if anybody can help, no? Yeah, there is vigilante culture. That means that there is the next please, after this, there is a forcible imposition and so on. So Islamic discourse is one form of the Islamic project. We have tried to redefine statehood, socialism, feminism, banking, finance, so many other activities of the state and the society. And we have discovered and we have shaped in the process a dichotomous worldview. Now we believe Islam versus the West, as if China, India, Middle East, Latin America, forget about all, it's Islam versus the West. There is this kind of clash of civilizations. Huntington must not have been so popular in America as it is in the Muslim world, particularly in Pakistan. And there has been the Arabist shift. We have been Arabizing the culture, whereas our culture had been for 500 to 600 years Ajami culture, Indo-Iranian culture. So partition and beyond, I will say that we have been very much into the partition, and that expressed itself through the literature of Manto, Bedi, Krishan Chandra, Ismat Chugtai, others. The other school of thought has looked at partition as a manifest destiny. Look, God-given country, that's how we got it. There is nostalgia about the lost world in India, for example. And there has been a migration from the center of the British Empire or the Mughal Empire to the periphery. That has created cultural snobbery. Those who came from India have had a kind of a superior self-image, and that has created problems. And in Pakistan, unfortunately, we have become an inward-looking culture where securitization, ideologization, all this has led to looking into ourselves and getting very much insular from the world at large. And I would say that has led to cultural schizophrenia. For the last 500 years, our culture has been torn apart between two loyalties. Loyalty to the land in which we live, India. Loyalty to the community, that is the Islamic community outside. And this has been written about quite a bit. And looking beyond the region all the time, Palestine, Turkey, Ottoman Empire, and so on. So there is the kind of a swing of the pendulum, sometimes with Akbar, sometimes with Aurangzeb, Jinnah, Zia, Benazir Bhutto, liberalism, conservatism, and so on. We live in these kinds of polarities. And I would say in this way, there has been a movement in opposite directions, rapidly expanding English medium schools and rapidly expanding madrasas. This is our culture, unfortunately. So culture across generations, what is it? Where have we come down to? 1947, look towards the West for education, for science, for development. Now, hatred against the West. Conspiracy theory. We are unable to look at 9/11. Who did it? Jews did it. Americans did it. Osama bin Laden, whatever. Malala. This nation cannot have the ability to love its own hero, that is Malala, for the cause of female education. In fact, it's conspiracy, Western conspiracy, and so on. So we are moving towards an insular frame of mind, and there is an orientation for monopoly over truth. We are right, others are wrong. There is a kind of a boundary, and that has destroyed the independence of mind in this country and linkage with the global civilization. Crisis of intersubjectivity. We cannot understand across the culture how others feel and others understand. Philanthropy, sans equanimity, and our modern people, particularly the elite, particularly the educated middle class and the professional middle class, it is westernized to a large extent. It is not democratic to that extent at all. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the kind of understanding that I have about culture in Pakistan. Since we've got some time, this is now a brief question and answer session. Questions? Yes, please.
Can a state which derives inspiration from Arab tribalistic traditions have a genuine culture embedded in subcontinental heritage, subcontinental historical experience?
No. The answer is very brief. No.
Yes? Yes, please. Go ahead.
My question is, since Ministry of Culture is devolved, would you suggest something to create some kind of body without changing the constitution, how we could, go about interacting with the world?
I think we have, there's a kind of a problem there because I think we feel that it is the state's responsibility to do this, that. The definition of culture, which is the one that I think what you're referring to, which is a state patronage, is different from culture as it exists, which is, our lived experience, which is different for people who are living in Gilgit, very different for somebody who's living in, Charsadda, or for that matter in Pishin or wherever. I think that the fact that we do look to the state for giving some patronage, and as Fouzia has, I think, described in detail the thinking that is now happening, that perhaps there's a possibility of coalescing what is actually happening and how to help it along or give it resources. I think what Sumant said earlier is quite revealing that in fact no state has the resources of the kind that would truly provide, patronage to diversity. But that there are other forces now. Among them there is the market. There is also the intellectual capital, which is there in every country. I think Pakistan has been more than lucky that we do have cultural capital, and which is diverse, which is vibrant, in spite of the, being targeted. The thing is how to really harness this so that there is an awareness that there is a richness across the spectrum, across the terrain, We have not had, though, that infrastructure that provides us. Somebody sitting in, you know, a small place, small town in one part of the country is not able to really experience either the music or the cuisine or the poetry of something that's happening in a different part of the country. The state simply has to step in and to provide that. And I think that since there are measures afoot, I have my own insight in this. I seem to think that every time a cultural policy is almost ready to be implemented, there's something that happens in the state of Pakistan and it shoots itself in the foot. And everything is changed and you go back to the status quo. I don't want to speak too much on this matter because, you know, I hope this cultural policy actually comes to fruition.
My privilege to ask a question from our Indian colleague. You've heard whatever the debate is going on in Pakistan. And of course, for the last several decades in India, these kinds of debates have been heard. What do you think? Are the issues comparable between the two countries, or are you simply talking in an extremely different way from whatever we are here? In other words, are our discourses going further apart, or what?
Well, yes, no, I think there is a similarity, but there is also a dissimilarity. Let me talk about the similarity. Now, the issues that you face here are a lot in common back home in terms of the cultural diversity that exists and the various debates, what to prioritize, what to focus on. But I think a conscious decision that the state took was that they would not have a hands-on approach to this. They would not have a policy which would promote a particular culture or over the other or in any other form. The state in some ways started acting as a facilitator. They created a lot of institutions in different parts of the country for different cultures and allowed those cultures, cultural institutions to work together with the community to do what they thought was best with them, rather than that becoming a state engineered or a state driven initiatives. And these institutions were autonomous and to the extent that they were possible, but as you know that in our political system, and you know, it never really is possible to keep everything independent, but yes, to the extent it was possible, they were allowed to operate with a certain degree of autonomy, which helped in a way dispel any kind of debate around what should be done and what should not be done. I think the only reason where I find a very stark similarity is that we still, even in modern day time, are talking about how do we need to continue the cultural history or the heritage of the past in the future, not realizing that every single day we create something which will be history tomorrow. So the history that is being created on the present day, there is no focus on that. So for me, the real vision of the two nations should be that while of course we will have to struggle with whatever history might be or might have been, but where is the investment in the cultural space to create those kind of aspirations for the young to say, we want to produce over the next 10 years at least 10 Nobel laureates from the region in the field of art, culture, literature, theatre. So that those are the people who are creating cultural history for the future generation, which is new today but will be old tomorrow.
This is the point. And at this point, unfortunately, the time is up and we have to finish our session today. And I would say, and you will agree, that it has been a fantastic session, particularly the kind of debate which was initiated from this end. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, probably till some other day, we wind up the discussion on culture in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I see. Okay.